out in the chat. So if you guys have any questions as you're going, please drop them in there, and I can always ask Tony too if you need me to.
Perfect. Well, today I'm Tony with Iowa Mentor, and we're just going to do a quick sneak peek of the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, the 5th edition. And I wish I could say that this is like a huge unveiling. It's really not. This is really in response to you all wanting to know, like, what is it? Oh my gosh, there's so many more elements, so many more components to it. But to be honest, it is really just more in depth and more inclusive. So, without any further ado, let's just get into it. And please feel free to stop me if you have questions. I really would love for this to be more of a conversation than me blowing through actually 7 slides. So, this shouldn't take us very long, but I just wanted to communicate to you what I know. So, what I do know before we get started is that the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, the 5th edition, probably won't launch until 2025. They're saying January, but I don't know. That's when I will know. So, me being able to teach it back to you or to give you information, I'm not sure when that's going to happen. But I do know that this is happening next year in January, is when all the information should be out there for us. So, I wanted to start with what you already know. So, I want to know, first of all, are my slides advancing?
Yes, they are.
Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you. So this is, of course, you've seen this before. This is what are the elements of effective practice for mentoring for folks that are new, that you're new to your program or new to mentoring as a program coordinator. This is our best practice work. So if you want to know the best practices in mentoring, this is the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, and it's on its 4th edition. This is what we know so far and what we use the guidelines for. So this is what we have. This is what you know. You know that the elements have 6 standards. And you know that there's recruitment, screening, training, matching and initiating, monitoring and supporting, and closure. So this is what you already know, and this is what the elements entail, and there's a checklist and all the things. And honestly, none of this really changes. It just gets more comprehensive. So this is what you don't know. This is a sneak peek of the 5th edition, and the language is clearer. You'll notice that they'll talk about best practices, and instead of it saying standards, we honestly use the word finally elements. So how that looks is I've broken it down so you don't have to read this tiny, tiny print. I don't want you to do that, but I do want you to see the overall structure of it. So in this slide, if you notice, there's a section 1, which is Foundations of Quality Mentoring. Then there's a section 2, which you already know. There's a few more enhancements in there, but I'll tell you. And then section 3. So what they've done is, instead of these being 6 standards that you are familiar with, if we're going to call this the Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring, we should call these elements, finally. So that's what they're going to be called. So there's no more standards. It's all elements. And they're going to say in the language that this is best practices. And what you're also going to notice is now this is going to be more inclusive in all the ways. So what do I mean by inclusive? I mean that there will be, it won't necessarily say matching and initiating anymore. And it's not going to say monitoring and supporting. because most of the time when so many of our programs, they do a lot of different mentoring than one-on-one. There is peer-to-peer mentoring. There are still some programs doing e-mentoring. There's programs that do team mentoring. So now it encompasses all of the ways that we mentor. So how are we doing? Any questions so far? Okay. So section 1 is the foundations of quality mentoring. So element number 1 is making sure that your program has a strong program design and a theory of change. And element number 2 is diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. So I would imagine this is a sneak peek again, and I don't know all the definitions of what they mean by some of the things that they've shared with us, but I can imagine that a theory of change is how your program planning and operation is going. And diversity and inclusion is thinking of all the ways your program can be inclusive, especially if you are a program that your mentees don't necessarily look like your mentors or come from the same background culturally. These are ways that you may want to put best practices in place for DEI. So that's what they're saying. And then programs that have a strong program design where you know where your program is going, how it operates, having a pathway of different things are strong programs. So these are things that you probably already know, but now they're a part of the best practices. So here is section 2 of the new EEP, practices for offering mentoring services. The ones in the dark blue, you already know. So the ones in the dark blue, recruiting for mentors, mentor screening and enrollment, um, preparing mentors for training. So if you notice, element 9 is no longer matching and initiating. Element 9 is now called forming mentoring relationships. And that's because there's quite a few programs out there now that don't necessarily match and initiate. There could be a group mentoring, especially with career mentoring. There may be one person talking to a group of students in a room. We do peer-to-peer mentoring. That's quite different than matching and initiating. So now they've broadened it so that you can think about how you form the mentoring relationship. Element number 11 talks about supporting the mentoring relationship. They have done away with monitoring and supporting the mentoring relationship. So the word monitoring is gone, but still requiring you to monitor the relationship, if that makes sense, but they've given it a broader language, calling it supporting the mentoring relationship, but you still do the same best practices. Element 12 now is called relationship closure and program exit. And so I think that you can understand the clear definition of that for the program, the relationship might close. And then how do they exit the program, doing no harm and making sure that it's effective in that way. So my last slide here is section 3, which is where I think the EEP has kind of been lacking um, in its efforts to help with best practices. So practices to support organizational health. So element 13 through 18, you can pretty much guess by looking at this that this is really about evaluation, about supporting the overall health of your mentoring program, talking about your program staff, your community engagement, your communication and your marketing, how's your financial health, and element 17, I'm curious myself on what that necessarily means about information management, like how the information goes out to your publics. I'm not particularly sure. So, I've talked enough. You guys tell me if you have questions, you want me to unpack something in more detail, but this is a sneak peek at what the elements will be looking like. I want to go back, if I can here, to this slide, the one in the middle. I didn't chat about the ones that you don't know. So element 3 and 5 and 7 and 10, um, they're not calling it parent engagement, so it may look different to you. They are calling it caregiver because there are so many ways that um, families now or people now are showing up for our young people. But, um, you know, there will be a recruitment for the mentee and their parents. So I'll say it in that language so that you can grasp it from what we're used to. Element 5 is, having a mentor enrollment and intake process, which you already do, but now it's called out more specifically so that you can have a best practice. Element 7, youth and parent training. So making sure that they understand what they're getting into and what the mentoring relationship looks like for them before they get started. And then of course, element 10, something that is so precious to us, is having some ongoing parent engagement and being able to track that and find ways that we can continue to make those connections. So I wanted to make sure that I said that, but let me know your thoughts. Any questions you have?
So I just want to clarify. So the majority of this is really more so changes in language and like the titles of things, but the actual practices of what we are doing is still going to be fairly similar.
Correct. And
Okay,
so,
awesome.
and that's why it's not a new document and they're calling it the fifth edition. Because if you were to, I'm going to slide back to the sneak peek here, you can kind of see that this is kind of like an umbrella, Tori, just like so much. They're just trying to encompass so much of what mentoring programs go through. So they've started at the very beginning and then taken you all the way to section 3 to the very end.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Any more questions? Thumbs up, thumbs down, gonna like it, gonna help. Your thoughts? Thumbs up. Okay. Yeah. And and here's a lingering question. If you are a certified program partner, you already do this with your NQMS. This is right in line. We've already rolled out a new NQMS, and all the questions and the assessment that you do on your program yourself once every 3 years, this is already embedded into the NQMS. They're already asking you these questions. So that's kind of a nice thing. Any more questions? I would imagine that they're still going to have a checklist, more comprehensive, I would imagine. Um, I don't know how we'll do enhancements and benchmarks. I'm sure that there's still going to be the same, that they'll have enhancement. I mean, they'll have benchmarks and then they'll have enhancements. I think that is still effective.
Tony, when does this roll out to our programs?
Okay, so I would say, I think the timeline is this fall is when us folks here, the affiliates, will learn some more about it. But I think at the summit in January of 2025 is when this should roll out to our programs. How we're going to roll this out and how we teach this to you all, I'm not certain. But I will say that if you have individuals in your programs right now who need to understand the elements of effective practice for mentoring just to know um, how we do it, I would strongly suggest you enroll them in or register them for the EEP fourth edition that's happening in in April. So April 23rd and 24th. Please, it's virtual, so you can totally, it's in our newsletter. I can totally send out the link. Maybe you can put that in the chat. I'll see if I can do that. And um, make sure that, your new folks, if they have never heard of the elements of effective practice before or gone through a training or looked at it, it would be great for them to be on the April or be in the April training. So anything else? I'm trying to think if there's any more questions, things I haven't covered. You guys can see, it's kind of hard to see this one. So any questions about section 1, about the foundations of quality mentoring? I think you guys can see where this is kind of in line with the questions that you get, the questions that you answer in your NQMS. And element 2 is also going to talk about your board or the people in the program, how they are able to relate to the publics that you're serving. How do they relate to your youth? How do they relate to the mentors? How do they relate to your community and parents? I think those are questions that they'll ask you. So any questions about section 1? Okay, section 2. How are you guys feeling about having more in-depth conversation and training even about youth and parent training and youth and parent or more parent engagement? They're going to give you best practices in that, more than anything. It's not, I hope that you guys don't think the EEP is really about measuring you against something. It's really giving you the best practices. So I want to make sure that I make that clear. I think this is one place where the EEP felt like it needed to be stronger, was in parent and youth engagement and, well, parent and youth training, and then overall parent engagement. So I think this is the part where, the fourth edition didn't really address this. So what are you all's thoughts on that? Especially school-based programs? I mean, I would really want to know what you think about that.
I'm with Teammates Mentoring and we are school-based. So I think that I'm interested to see what details are within the caregiver
Mhm.
portion. I do think it's very important, but it's one of those things that we'll probably add to some things that we'll need to do.
Yeah.
Because most of our contact is with the school and the students,
Sure.
and not so
Mhm.
much the parents. So that'll be another element to add in and figure out how we can go about that.
Yeah, and again, that's why, thanks, Tori. I think that's why this is such a best practices type of format, because again, when you are a mentoring program and your contact is through the school, I think, like, sometimes this you rely on the school to kind of help you with your relationship with the parents in that way. So yeah, it'll be really interesting. I am too curious of how that works. I think community-based programs, if you're a community-based program, you get a front row seat sometimes to the parent engagement piece. So it'll be really interesting to see for sure.
Mhm.
And then, are there some of you who train your youth? Just curious. I'm looking at this saying that they are going to have element 7, which is youth and caregiver preparation and training. I understand letting them know the lay of the land of the program and making sure that they are on board with what your program entails. But training them, I wonder if that's orientation or if that's training. So there are things that I don't know, but really interested in leaning in. And then the last one, any questions about the practices? This is the one where I'm very excited that most of the programs, when we do technical assistance with programs, it's usually on um, section 3. So I think that this is why they brought it in as having best practices, because it's something that the other elements, um, after closure, um, we don't really talk about the overall support or help, organizational's health. So this will be really great, I think. So do you have any questions about section 3? I wish I knew more about element 17, but I don't. So it's going to be interesting to me too.
I think this is my favorite section. I'm most excited for this.
Yeah.
I'm very curious about like element 16 and 17, but for sure 16, like the resource development, what that's going to look
Hmm.
like,
Yeah.
how we get to kind of do that. But those two I'm like very, very excited about.
Yeah. I'm excited about it as well, because somewhere in here is your sustainability plan. Somewhere in here is um, a lot of this, but yeah, this is how your program operates, and giving you some best practices here will be good. So, well, listen, I don't want to keep you all. I'm going to stop recording. At least I think I can stop recording. Hang on here.